Alright, I need to level with you guys. Ever since it turned April, I've felt a little anxious, a little excited, a little trepidatious about what the month may bring, and I think I've finally figured out what the problem is. Yep, it's just what I thought. I've got Last of Us fever. Now, if you don't know, Season 2 of The Last of Us premieres on April 13th, just 2 weeks away at the time I record this. And with the sheer amount of press that the cast and the creatives have been doing, it feels like excitement is at an all-time high. And naturally, when we talk about Season 2 of The Last of Us, which adapts at least part of The Last of Us Part 2, the game, there is only one question on everyone's mind. When are they going to do it? Before I can fully get to grips with that question, though, I need to leave a big spoiler warning on this video. If you haven't played The Last of Us Part 2 and you don't want to know anything that happens in that story that might happen in Season 2, this is your chance to get away now, because I will be spoiling some of the biggest things that happen in this game. Of course, what I'm referring to is the death of Joel that happens in the early hours of The Last of Us Part 2. There has been so much discussion around how the show will treat this story beat because, well, it's pretty significant, right? Some people theorized in the early days of Season 1 that they might not kickstart Season 2 with this moment at all. They thought maybe we'll see the story play out in chronological order, going into the flashback sequences from the game and just playing them out one after the other, leading up to Joel's death, maybe in the season finale. Or maybe the showrunners were going to extend the story in Jackson before we get to that moment, show us more about what Ellie and Joel have been up to, and then again finish the season with that moment to kick off The Last of Us Part 2 as we know it. For me personally, I've never really bought into those theories that this is what's going to happen, and ever since the most recent trailer dropped, which gave us our biggest look at Season 2 yet and just how much of the story from The Last of Us Part 2 is being adapted, I am pretty confident that Joel's death absolutely has to happen by the latest, the end of Episode 2. And why I think that comes down to a bunch of different reasons. It's my own thoughts on how The Last of Us 2 story should be told. It's based on some of the interviews that the creatives and cast have produced so far, and even some of the descriptions of the episode that have officially been revealed. What it's not based on, though, are any leaks that may or may not be doing the rounds or any insider information. I have had enough Last of Us 2 leaks to last me a lifetime, so I've not been following that stuff. I have no idea if what I'm saying today is going to be the plan. It's just my theory based on the stuff that everyone has access to officially. So, why do I think this has to happen in the early part of the season based on what we've seen so far? Well, like I said, the most recent trailer showed us so many scenes from the game that happened quite late into Ellie's story. We were teased with the flashback between Ellie and Joel that happens at the museum. We saw what seems to be Ellie confronting Nora in the hospital and ultimately killing her. And we saw a bunch of other teasers as well, including Jeffrey Wright's character and the Seraphites. Almost all of that stuff is chunky, late-game Ellie story from her first 3 days in Seattle, with the likes of the museum trip and Nora and the hospital specifically coming after a huge amount of hours have been put into the game itself. And it goes without saying that most of this stuff can't happen with Joel still in the picture. Ellie, by this point in the game anyway, is on her revenge kick, and it's why she's hunting down the likes of Nora and going to such extreme lengths to track them down in strongholds, and in that case, the hospital. So if we're going to get there in the space of 7 episodes, Joel kind of needs to die early on. We need to kick off that story, we need to get Ellie moving, we need to get her to Seattle and hunting down Abby's gang. And yeah, that's assuming that this season isn't going to tell even more story, maybe completing Ellie's stint in Seattle and ending, like many people assume, with that theater showdown when Abby finally confronts Ellie and her friends. Ever since the season was announced, many people assumed that that would be a natural endpoint, a natural cliffhanger to tease what's to come in season 3. But why do I think it's going to happen in episode 2, even away from just how much story there is to tell within the space of these 7 episodes? Well, there's one thing that I keep thinking about from season 1 that I think will inform how season 2 is structured. See, way back when Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann were developing that first season, they actually had originally 10 episodes that they produced rather than the 9 that aired. When doing interviews and talking about how they built the pilot episode, they both admitted that they encountered one big problem, that within the space of that episode, they didn't get to the season's inciting incident. They and HBO both agreed that we needed, as an audience, to have Ellie and Joel interact in that first episode, and for them to be sent on their season-long quest to find the Fireflies. That was the inciting moment of the entire series. That's the catalyst of the entire story to come. And so they re-edited the first 2 episodes into one feature-length episode where we actually saw Joel team up with Ellie and them go on this adventure. Initially, it was supposed to end much earlier with Joel dumping the body onto the body pit, but they realized that they needed the reason for the season to exist at all to happen in that first episode. And what is the reason for season 2 to exist? It's Joel's death acting as the catalyst for all of the characters' motivations going forward. The story of season 2 is revenge, it's guilt, it's empathy, it's all about the reactions that every character has to that death, whether it's the perpetrators or whether it's the victims. With this in mind then, and the lessons that the creators learned from season 1, I do think they'll get to this inciting incident sooner rather than later, or have it be dragged out until the middle of the season. If I had to assume then, I don't think we will see Joel completely dead and buried at the end of the first episode. I think we've got a little bit too much to fit in there, but I do think it might end on a cliffhanger. Maybe when Abby's team gets one up on Joel, maybe when he gets shot, and it leaves you wondering what's going to happen next. And then, because we're playing with the audience's expectations, it'll feel like an even bigger gut punch when Joel dies at the beginning of episode 2 rather than the end of episode 1. Yeah, they might not do this, but it kind of reminds me what happened in Breaking Bad, and full spoilers for that show for the next 30 seconds or whatever. That series pulled an amazing rug pull by having one of the main characters, Hank, die at the start of the episode after being ambushed at the end of the previous one. Everyone online was talking about how they wouldn't kill a character like this in the opening moments and then move on. Of course, it's big enough to serve as the finale of the episode, and then we'll deal with everything after. I think having a cliffhanger similar to this at the end of episode 1, though, will allow The Last of Us writers to kind of have their cake and eat it too. We get the inciting incident that these people have come to seek revenge on Joel, but we don't get the full picture until episode 2, where we realize, oh, these people aren't just going to keep coming after him. That's not going to be the story of the season. He's not just going to be injured and Ellie setting out on her own. He's gonna be dead. And I think it's important for this beat to happen early on before we get too much time with either characters or really see them together. The power of The Last of Us Part 2, in my opinion, is about the player as well as Ellie feeling like they've been robbed of something. It's wanting to see these characters reunite, to reconcile, to have more adventures like they did in the first season, to continue the parental and child bond that was established there, to live out the rest of their lives with some semblance of happiness and overcome all of the odds like they did in season 1 again. And the way The Last of Us Part 2 is structured with its flashbacks only drives this sense of loss home with every new reveal, especially that scene on the porch, which lets you realize that, yeah, Joel and Ellie were not in a good place, but they were finally coming to a point where they might reconcile. And then, literally the day after this conversation happened and they decided on this, Joel gets his head beaten in with a golf club, and they never get the chance to fully realize that conversation. And while you wouldn't lose the impact entirely if you told this story chronologically and had all of that information before Joel died, the sense of loss is supposed to feel present and burning, and I feel like as we get caught up in Ellie's rage, those flashbacks are a reminder of it. They put you back in the headspace. They remind you, this is what you could have had. You could have had this sequence in the museum multiple times, had this awful tragedy, not befell them. That said though, while I do think Joel's death is definitely going to happen across episode 1 and episode 2, that's not to say there aren't going to be major changes made here and there. We already know that by the inclusion of characters like Eugene in the trailer, who we only ever heard about in the game and didn't actually see in the flesh and didn't really play an important role to any of the characters' overall story. One possible thing that might be changed though, at least according to the fandom on the forums who have pieced this together via the screenshots that have been released and the footage and some of the interviews, is that one key moment in Joel's death scene might actually be changed in a really interesting way, I think. So it's been theorized that unlike in the game where it's Joel and Tommy who get trapped with Abby's gang and then ultimately get overpowered, it might actually be in the TV show Joel and Dina. Now, having thought about this for a little bit, I really do think this could shift the dynamic and the motivations of all the characters going forward in a really compelling way. Now, Dina obviously had a motivation to go with Ellie to Seattle in the game. They were romantically involved and she was wanting to support her friend who had just lost this figure under such brutal circumstances. However, I think this change in the TV show, if they do go down this route, would add more motivation for her to leave with Ellie if she feels in some way responsible for Joel's death. Maybe that's in a broader sense. Maybe she's responsible in some way for Joel and her encountering Abby's group and getting trapped with them. Maybe when they're all holed up and hiding from the Horde, she's the one who naively gets a little bit too trusting and opens up to the group, revealing her name and revealing who Joel is to them, so they know they've got their targets in their sights. Something like that, with her feeling responsible for his death, whether she is or whether she isn't, again, I think would act as an interesting wrinkle to the character and certainly add to the different dimensions between Ellie's response to Joel's death and, of course, Dina's response to the death as well. Maybe he's still with Ellie and he gets to watch Joel die and be traumatized by things that way. But again, if he's not with Joel when he gets ambushed and when Abby's group takes advantage of him and when they do the most damage, maybe there's a part of him that blames himself for that he wasn't with his brother, that he wasn't there to maybe protect him. Again, it's this idea of what could I have done, what should I have done, those unrealized hypotheticals that so much of the drama in The Last of Us Part 2 is born from. I've also been thinking about something that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin and Caitlin Dever have been talking about in interviews regarding Abby's backstory. Caitlin Dever, of course, playing Abby in the show. One thing that they've mentioned is that they're going to reveal Abby's motivations much earlier than they did in the game, because otherwise, with the way the season has been split up, you wouldn't understand why she is there and why she is doing what she's doing until maybe midway through season 3. And I think that makes the marketing as well make more sense. They haven't been as shy as they were in the game, revealing that Abby, at least in some way, is connected to the Fireflies. So to me, all of this just indicates that we're going to find out why Abby killed Joel very early on and have us as the audience understand why. With that big reveal pushed up to the early part of the season then, I think that season 2's big mystery surrounding one of its characters will actually come down to Ellie. See, in the game, not only do you not fully understand what Abby's motivations were, you also don't have the full picture of exactly what Ellie knows or does not know about what Joel did and who these people are who actually came to kill him. In the game, it's a big reveal that Ellie knew exactly what Joel had done and has been engaging on this killing spree regardless. She knows that this wasn't just a random act of violence. She knows exactly why it was motivated. She knows that it was revenge and she doesn't care. It's an excellent motivation that reframes Ellie's actions in the game and probably will in the program as well. And again, you can't have that be impactful or work as a reveal if you do things in chronological order or if you wait to kill Joel later on in the season and have those flashback scenes inserted before then, so then you fully understand the context of where Ellie and Joel are at with their relationship. I'm not entirely sure, but I cannot wait to see how this scene and the rest of the season plays out in season 2.